Next, I would like to request Karthik Manoharan to address the event.
Uh, Thank you, Puhar Torer. And first of all, let me convey my thanks and a simultaneous admiration for the excellent work of the Dravidian Professionals Forum. I think you're doing a remarkable work by keeping such historical as well as topical issues as a matter of intellectual debate. And this is particularly very important because there has been a sort of an attempt to portray Dravidian politics as being anti intellectual or being devoid of intellectual content. So, in that sort of a scenario, I think this creation of this forum and the activities of this forum show and display the sort of dynamic intellectual conversations that are happening in the Dravidian circles. So I thank you all for organizing this wonderful forum. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. Thank you, Puhar Torer. Thank you, Dharani Torer, for inviting me to speak. And I also would like to thank Dr. Tirunavukarasu, who spoke to me. Thiru sir, apart from being a personal friend and a great intellectual, he is also my teacher. So he was my teacher when I was an undergrad student at Loyola College, and he's been an inspiration for me. So it's really a matter of pride that I'm speaking on the same forum as him. And thank all the attendees who are here today. So on that note, on this occasion of Periyar's Remembrance Day, I would also want to share some very happy news with all of my friends here. My book titled Periyar, A Study in Political Atheism, will be published by Orient Black Swan earlier next year. So this is an academic book which looks at Periyar's approach to religion and why he makes the critique of religion. So as you would all know that there is this very simplistic understanding that Periyar was atheist and he was abusing gods, right? So what this book tries to do, what my book tries to do, is to try to place Periyar's critique of religion in a theoretical perspective and understand it as fundamentally a critique of established hierarchical power, right? Because in my reading, Periyar's critique of religion was fundamentally rooted in a critique of caste hierarchy and, more importantly, a critique of state power, right? So Periyar did not want to replace one religion or one form of mystification with another form of mystification. His core project was to create radically free individual human beings. As Thiru sir rightly pointed, it's not just freedom from, okay, we are free from the British, we are free from casteism, we are free from North Indian domination. No, no, no. It is also a freedom towards. And this idea of freedom is not just for the Tamils, it has global relevance. So the purpose of my book, Periyar, A Study in Political Atheism, is not just about Tamil Nadu. It's not just about Dravidian politics, but it is an attempt to take Periyar to a wider and a global audience. So, as and when it is published, I would need all of your support and all of your help to take it to a broader audience. And I'll thank you in advance right now. So, now. On to my speech. So I just wanted to highlight, I mean, this is something which I deal with in my book as well, is what makes Periyar a humanist? What does humanism actually mean, right? What is humanism? Now, this is one of the very sort of commonly abused terms, right? So you can see many people on Facebook profiles, Twitter profiles saying that, I'm a humanist. What does humanist mean? I love all human beings. Okay, so basically, humanism is, in a popular understanding, is seen as a sort of a love for human beings, peacefulness, pacifism, and so on. But its original usage does not have those connotations exactly, and it is actually a very complicated and philosophically loaded term. See, the term humanism became popular in 1850s Europe, and it was exactly a German coinage, and it referred to the study of humanity. So what's so different about this? Because it is different from theology, or it is different from the hard sciences. Theology is the study of God and divinity. Hard sciences, physics, biology, blah, 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 are referred to the natural sciences. So humanism was used in or introduced by a German thinker in 1850s to refer to the study of humans and the human activities, culture, language, etc., and so on and so forth. So the term humanism itself is derived from the term humanisti, a term from 15th century Florence, a time of Renaissance and a time when deeply held superstitions, traditions, and religious values were being criticized in Europe. And the term humanisti was used to refer to educators, people who educated people, right? So a central feature of humanism is the understanding that the human subject or human beings are the main actors in shaping their own destiny. So it is not God or some divine force which shapes our destiny. It can be divine agency, or in Tamil or Hindu terminology, we can call it vidhi, karma. Not this, it is human beings and our actions which shape our own destiny. This is the central concept of humanism. The idea is that every individual has self-determination. That is, each individual has the right, or has the possibility, to chart out their own course of action and their own uh, mm, choices. And it is not something predetermined by external non-human forces like God or spirits or anything whatsoever. Okay. So now this term humanism covers sort of a wide variety of thinkers. So there are theologians like Martin Buber, Soren Kierkegaard, who all can be categorized as humanists, because though they believe in God, they also believe that it is the human agency and the human approach and human action in the everyday world that is the key factor even in understanding man or woman's relation to God. Okay? And then in the more modern and the more contemporary phase, you had thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, who were the most important and the most active proponents of humanism in Europe in the previous century. Now, both of these thinkers were atheists. A key reason for them being atheists is that they said that the presence of an all-powerful, all-controlling agent called God is fundamentally a denial of the humanism or the self-determination of the individual human being. Right? So they believe that there is no such thing called God, there's no such thing called divine. Their individual choices and their self-determination, which charters the course of history and is responsible for social action. Now, Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir were again not just pacifist humanists, they also believed in radical activism to change the course of history and to alter the structures of society. Now, we can read Periyar in this sort of a radical humanist tradition, because Periyar there is no God and that is all. No, Periyar is actually making this claim in order to make human beings act, to change the system of hierarchy, systems of oppression, systems of inegalitarianism, and to bring forth egalitarian, equal, and a free society. So not just freedom from God, but also freedom towards rationality, freedom towards equality. So what Periyar actually is doing over here, and what is special about Periyar's humanism, is that it is quite different from the atheism of, thinkers like, let's say, Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens or Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett, because these sort of thinkers, Richard Dawkins or Daniel Dennett, are very sharp in their attacks on religion. They are very sharp in their attacks on God and in their attempts to disprove the existence of God and falsifying religious beliefs. They do all of that. But these thinkers do not take a stand on pressing social issues that their societies face on a day-to-day basis. But Periyar was not like that. To Periyar, dismissing or criticizing religion was not a single point agenda. It was always connected to a fight for social justice and a criticism of hierarchical forms of power. So Periyar was not just content with criticizing, Hindu gods, actually, he is not only criticizing Hindu gods. If we read Periyar in a very broad sense, we can see that he is critical of all major religions as such, right? So he's critical of Hinduism, he's critical of Islam, he's critical of Christianity. In fact, I would say that the only religion that he is not that much critical about, or the religion that he favors the most, is Buddhism, right? And Periyar does that largely not because he thinks that Buddhism is an ideal religion, because he sees Buddhism as an anti-religion. So to Periyar's idea of Buddhism is not the sort of Buddhism which you see in Sri Lanka or Burma or in Japan, right? So Periyar's idea of Buddhism is a sort of a non-ritualized, rationalist philosophy of life. So in a sense, Periyar sees Buddha as a precursor to the self-respect and the atheist movement. And he saw the Buddha as an original atheist and rationalist who challenged both superstitions as well as social hierarchies, right? So Periyar's idea of Buddhism is a lot more common to Ambedkar's idea of Buddhism than any form of ritualized religious sort of Buddhism that we see in countries. And also, I also think that Periyar was always sharply critical of the intertwining of religious and politics, right? So he believed that he was a very sharp secularist in the French Republican tradition, that not only should religion be separated from politics, right? But there should also be a political space to criticize religion, right? But this was a very significant position to take in India, that too in a space where the predominant majority are believers. So in a sense, we could read thinkers like Mahatma Jyotirao Phule and Periyar as the pioneers of Enlightenment thinking in India. Because one of the key aspects of Enlightenment is the secularization of the public sphere, right? So now when we look at the European Enlightenment, they didn't immediately abolish religion, and not all of the Enlightenment thinkers wanted to abolish religion right away. But what they wanted to do is to create a public sphere where individuals and thinkers had the right to openly and freely and without any fear of persecution debate, critique, and even criticize, and even call for the rejection of religion. So in that sense, we could view thinkers like Jyotirao Phule and Tandai Periyar, and in fact, some of the predecessors to Periyar, like the thinkers of the Madras Secular Society, thinkers like Atipakam Venkatachala Nayakar, as the pioneers of enlightenment in India. Because what they brought to the table was a very important aspect, which is essential for all modern democracies, which is a critique of social power. And we have to admit that religion is social power, right? And religion does have the tendency, all religions have the tendency to impose rigid social hierarchies. So placing this on the table, that fine, we are not imposing our atheism on you, but there must be a space in society to propagate a critique and a criticism of religion. This is very essential to any form of political as well as social democracy, right? So what I would say is what Periyar changed was not the extent to which society continued to be religious. I mean, we can see it in Tamil Nadu, right? As in, see, I'm not that great with the numbers, but I'm willing to bet that Tamil Nadu has more temples than Uttar Pradesh, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, and Rajasthan taken together. I'm willing to bet. I could be wrong, but with a general understanding, I think that Tamil Nadu has more temples than all of these places taken together. So can we say that Periyar failed? No. In fact, I would say that despite the presence of such religiosity, religion in Tamil Nadu is a private affair. It is not a political affair, right? This distinction which happens is very crucial, right? So in other words, there are practicing Hindus, but politically Dravidians. There are people who will be faithfully Hindu. There are people who will faithfully go to the temples on every religious occasion, this, that, and blah, blah, blah. But even by mistake, they will not vote for a Hindu nationalist party. Right? So, I can give examples from my own friend circle. I mean, I knew this gentleman who was a very pious, Sai Baba devotee, right? And every day from in morning and night, he would, do his prayers to Sai Baba, and, and even when he passed away, the last words he said were Sai Ram. Okay. But this gentleman would never allow criticism of Periyar in front of him. Right? So these sort of examples, you can see it around your family, you can see it around society, but these are not to be seen as hypocrisies. In fact, I would say that this is an actual thriving democracy, right? That you are, what shall I say, you can be religious and you can view religion as something being completely separate from your politics. So you are being as a Hindu, or you're being as a Saivite or a Vaishnavite or a Muslim or a Christian or whatever, does not impact the political choices which you make. The religious identity does not matter, right? So that is Periyar's very significant contribution, that he did not change to the extent to which the society continued to be religious. In fact, in one of his last speeches also, he says that I have not succeeded in demolishing religion in society, but this is a continuous task. But what Periyar successfully changed was the extent to which religion was seen as a crucial aspect of one's political identity. And we can say that despite Tamil Nadu having an overwhelming majority of a quote-unquote Hindu population, right? I think the Hindu population in Tamil Nadu is something around 89 to 90%, which is even more than Uttar Pradesh. In Uttar Pradesh, it's 82% or something of that sort only. It's the percentage of Hindus is more in Tamil Nadu. But still, if Hindu nationalists have not been able to make a foothold in Tamil Nadu, it is this legacy of separating religious belief from political identity. I will give you one more example. In the 2019 Indian general elections, the Indian Union Muslim League candidate K. Nawaz Khani, who is a practicing Muslim, he was part of the DMK-led alliance, and he defeated the BJP candidate Nainar Nagendran, who is a practicing Hindu and a practicing Hindutvadi, by a margin of over 1 lakh votes in the Hindu holy city of Ramanathapuram. Okay? You know that Ramanathapuram is the home to the Rameshwaram temple, which is one of the holiest sites for Hindu believers. But in this constituency, a practicing Muslim candidate defeated a practicing Hindutvadi candidate. This is a consequence of the sort of Dravidian secular culture which was instilled in Tamil Nadu by Periyar. Perhaps one could say that Periyar fostered a Habermasian spirit of communicative rationality where participants, the public, critically argue and question things which are taken for granted, such as religion, superstition, and religious identity. Now, this does not necessarily mean a radical conversion to one or other point of view, but a willingness for democratic dialogue and to critically examine one's own position. And more importantly, a willingness to accept criticisms of one's own beliefs and faith. A case in point is a relationship between the saint Kundrakudi Adigalar, who was the leader of the Tiruvannamalai Adinam Saivite Mutt, and Periyar. Right? Now, they had a very sort of an interesting relationship. Now, Kundrakudi Adigalar was a staunch Saivite. Periyar, as you know, was an atheist. But when they met, right, Periyar always referred to the Adigalar with great deference and with great respect. Right? Likewise, the Adigalar also had remarkable respect and goodwill on Periyar's social reform activities. In fact, both Periyar also says that he does not have any problem with God, but as long as these sort of social hierarchies are existing in the name of God, he is going to continue to criticize it, right? And if God really does exist, let him come down and come and rectify, right? So, and the Adigalar also says, as long as these sort of social inequalities exist, as Periyar has pointed out, Adigalar says that his campaign for Saivism or for a theistic life will always be combined with social reform, that they cannot be separated. Now, this sort of a healthy relationship would not have happened had either Adigalar been a religious fundamentalist or had Periyar been a dogmatic atheist like Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris, right? This flexibility, this willingness to have this sort of a democratic dialogue provided certain basic criteria were met: a commitment for social justice, a commitment towards reforming the inegalitarian aspects of society. These created a sort of a composite and a dynamic culture, political culture in Tamil Nadu. Now, I just want to make a reference to the point which Todar Puhar Gandhi raised about Periyar being referred to as a holy cow. I don't think Periyar is a holy cow. I personally, if I were to give an analogy, I would say that Periyar is like chili beef, right? So many of us like to eat chili beef. It is amazing. It is good for health. It's really tasty. But there are some people who don't. And there are some people who also will say that not only will I not eat chili beef, no one should eat chili beef, right? So unfortunately, it is very tough to have a dialogue with such people. Okay, that's just on a humorous note. But having said that, I don't think Periyar has at any point of time been a holy cow in Tamil Nadu, because Periyar has always been subject to the worst forms of merciless criticisms and dishonest appraisals, right? It has always been there, and even in Tamil Nadu. The fact that the Dravidian parties, whether DMK or ADMK, have provided democratic space for these sort of criticisms or Periyar to exist in Tamil Nadu itself shows the willingness to democratic practices that exist in the state. I mean, I just want to say, is this sort of criticism of Hindutva leaders possible in Gujarat? Or when the CPM was ruling in West Bengal, was it possible for a Trotskyite academic to secure a place in any sort of a government-run university in West Bengal? On the other hand, I can point out 24 academics in Tamil Nadu's universities who are sharply not just critical of Periyar, but thoroughly opposed to the Dravidian movement and the Dravidian parties. They are thoroughly critical and dismissive of Dravidian parties, right? I don't think the Dravidian movement has installed any sort of holy cows in the state. Every of our leaders, whether it be Periyar or Anna or Kalaignar, or for that matter, even MGR or Jayalalitha, have all been subject to critical scrutiny and critical introspection and interrogation, right? In fact, every time there has been a criticism of Periyar, even it be absurd criticism of Periyar, the pro-Periyarists have responded by publishing books, right? You know, when a certain group criticize Periyar of being anti-Dalit or of doing nothing for Dalits, our good friend Thirumavelan published a book called Adika Sadhigalukku Mattume Avar Periyara, right? They did not say that people who made such criticism should be shut down. They responded by publishing books. This, I think, is a very important aspect of the Dravidian intellectual culture, is that we have responded to intellectual criticisms with intellectual responses. Even if the intellectual criticisms have been thoroughly dishonest, we have largely been responding in sort of a very civilized and in a very democratic manner. So to say that there is no space for criticizing Periyar in Tamil Nadu is quite a travesty, I would say. Now, having said that, I also want to identify three big challenges for Periyarism and Dravidian politics in Tamil Nadu. One, as rightly pointed out before by Puhar Thorar, Dharani Thorar, and Thiru, is the pan-Indian Hindutva project. That is a major existential danger because it relies on centralizing the all sort of power and authority at the center, and depriving the states of their autonomy, of fiscal freedoms, and also the progressive social welfare measures that have been instituted in states like Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and other places are also coming under slow and steady attack, right? So, and this aspect of communal polarization, we saw it in some speeches in Haridwar a few days back. This sort of extreme communal polarization and making religious animosities is very dangerous. So that is one obvious danger. The second danger is the Tamil nativist project. I don't want to give them the credibility by calling them nationalist. I think they are nativist because they believe in this extreme form of nativism, that certain native groups have the birth-based, blood and birth-based rights to Tamil Nadu. Now, all modern and all democratic societies believe in the idea of citizenship based on, what shall I say, based not on blood, but based on integration, right? Based on integration, based on contract. But to look at citizenship as a concept based on blood and heritage is a very dangerous and is a very volatile concept. Now, the leaders of this Tamil nativist formations might like to think of themselves as Hitler, but I think they are a lot closer to Robert Mugabe and Idi Amin, right? But having said that, that does not make them any less dangerous. This possibility of inciting hatred against linguistic minorities must be challenged and checked as much as inciting hatred towards religious minority. And the third third challenge I would see is the formation of certain caste cartels, right? So this sort of caste outfits and caste cartels, as I would prefer to call them, do not do anything good for the welfare of their caste or communities. But they have an idea of caste supremacy, believe that their own caste is unique, their own caste is special in some way. And one other thing which is common to all of them is that they are thoroughly anti-Periyar and anti-Dravidian politics, right? Now, these exist at all levels of the hierarchy. So it is not only the topmost caste which does this. We can identify several caste cartels among the intermediate castes, among the most backward castes, among even the scheduled castes, who believe that their caste alone is something unique, is alone something heroic, is alone something intellectual. And for this reason, they prefer to attack the politics which believes in abolishing caste identities and abolishing caste supremacy, which is Periyarist politics, right? So at times, we can see the alliance of the Hindutva group, the Tamil nativist group, and these sort of caste cartels. So this three-way alliance is a sort of a challenge for Dravidian politics in the state. And I think we also should have an alliance of progressive forces, a broad alliance. And I think we need to have more of these sort of intellectual conversations and democratic discussions, as combined definitely with the remarkable sort of political interventions which the current Dravidian rule is making on a day-to-day basis. So on that note, I'll conclude my speech, and I thank you all again for inviting me here. Thank you.